All right, ladies and gentlemen, today is January the 16th. And yesterday, on January the 15th, America and many people I know, including myself, celebrated the life and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been 95 years old today if his life was not cut short by an assassin's bullet in 1968 at the tender age of 39. Now, each year about this time, everyone gets together and they celebrate his life. They celebrate one of his many speeches, which is the I Have a Dream speech. And it seems to me they just use him as a mascot to show that everybody, America has made it to, little black girls and little white girls holding hands and singing free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. But what pains me to know that, the majority of the people who celebrate this day and promote this day really don't know who the real Martin Luther King Jr. Was. He was much more than just those 3 or 4 lines that they promote today. Actually, if Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today, he would probably be more hated today than he was back then. Because keep in mind, at the time of his death, Martin Luther King was hated by 75% of Americans at that time. And that's just by poll reports, but I would say probably about 90% of Americans, both black and white, because Martin Luther King was no drum major for unity. They called him a drum major for justice, but he called America out on its racism, on its materialism, on its capitalism, on its oppression. He called America out so much, once again, that they eventually killed him. Now, and when I say they, I'm talking about the United States government, because in 1999, there was a commission, there was an inquest, an inquiry of the government's role in assassinating Martin Luther King Jr. And it was found that, yes, they were the main catalyst. They were complicit in the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and had to award the King family a certain amount of dollars. And with that, nobody ever talks about that. And the reason why, because if you remember 1999, all of America was embroiled and engrossed in the Monica Lewinsky Bill Clinton scandal, meaning more people were concerned about, who was giving the president oral sex than the fact that this government just 30 years earlier admitted to killing one of the most celebrated and prolific leaders and change makers of our time. And so it's almost hypocritical that 20 years after his death, or 15 years after his death, the same government would orchestrate a holiday to honor the man that they killed. And once again, reduce his legacy to a few lines in an I Have a Dream speech that also called out racism. So they don't talk about that part of the speech. And I'm gonna read some of the parts of the speech that you won't hear on Martin Luther King Day. And I'm gonna read some more quotes and some more ideas of Martin Luther King that they won't tell you about in the history books. They won't tell you about in the programs that you go to. You know, they want to reduce him to, you know, just integration and voting rights and civil rights. But he was much more than that. You know, he called out America on so many facets. But also, in honoring, you know, in commemorating the day. Now, mind you, 1983, 22 senators voted against honoring Dr. Martin Luther King with a national holiday. Now, I'm in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and one of the most staunch opposers of the King holiday was then Senator Jesse Helms. He took a 16-day filibuster, which means he just sit and talked and talked and talked and talked for 16 days to prevent the bill, or try to prevent the bill from being passed. And also, he claimed that King's actions oriented Marxism and was not compatible with the concepts of his country. And he also highlighted that Martin Luther King's hatred of this country should be considered when considering or voting on this holiday. Now, once again, I'll say Martin Luther King Jr. didn't hate the country, but he hated the hypocrisy, the oppression, the mantra of, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. But yet and still, the treatment of the black people in the country at his time, and even sometimes today, did not mirror those same sentiments. So these senators actually opposed the holiday. And as I mentioned earlier, if Martin Luther King was alive right now, he would not be celebrated. And I'm going to tell you why. But keep in mind, once again, it's almost like they make him a mascot. You know, they once again, the first thing you hear is, I have a dream, and, you know, free at last, and, you know, hold hands together. But that speech was more than that. Even in that speech, which you won't hear, Martin Luther King celebrated the marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community. And by that militancy, meaning that black people were starting not to just accept, you know, the beatings, the lynchings, the disrespect. They started to fight back. They had something called, you know, the Red Summers of the 60s, where, once again, they won't talk about in the history books, the black people all over the nation were taking up arms and defending themselves against white supremacists and Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow desegregation. So people don't talk about that within the movement, and how integral that was in the progression of things. You know, even though Martin Luther King practiced nonviolence, and he didn't always, and I'm going to tell you about that too. But there was a certain group of the black population that wasn't going for it. So history kind of suppresses that action, and how much that influences the people to be like, wait a minute, we can't, you know, these people over here are nonviolent, but these people are violent. So we can't keep doing this. So it all worked together for the good, but people don't focus on that aspect of black people defending themselves, because that doesn't fit the narrative of, you know, black docility and fragility and, you know, turn the other cheekism and all of those things, which once again has their rightful place. But also, just as Patrick Henry said in America against the British, give me liberty or give me death. You know, we have not yet begun to fight. So as Malcolm so eloquently put it, if violence is wrong in America, then violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent defending black men and black women and black children and black babies, then it's wrong for America to send me over abroad and be violent in defense of her. Another thing that he and Martin agreed upon. Now, once again, that's another reason Martin was probably taken out, because of his staunch approach in opposition to the Vietnam War. Now, once again, today, America is known for its industrial military industrial complex, which means we go over all, the world and fighting. And once again, that's big business. And Martin Luther King was definitely opposed to that. So once again, if Martin Luther King was alive today, he'll be speaking up against a lot of the things that are going on today. But just let me give you a few tidbits that they won't tell you about. In 1956, when Martin Luther King's house was firebombed in Alabama, Martin Luther King went down there to the courthouse and applied for him a gun permit so he can carry that thing on him. Because once again, it's every man's Second Amendment right to protect themselves. So that's where that nonviolent theology kind of opposes the American God-given right in the Constitution for every man to a right to bear arms and protect himself. Nevertheless, they denied him, of course, but Martin Luther King already had a stash of guns at his crib. Now, this is in 1956. And so they tell the story of one Bayard Rustin, which was one of his most notable advisors. Now, if you see the movie that just came out, Rustin, you know about Rustin and, his proclivity to live on the edge, shall I say. He played for the other team, if you get my if you get my drift. But it was Bayard Rustin and one Reverend Glenn Smiley who came to visit Martin Luther King shortly thereafter, and they noticed all the weaponry that Martin Luther King had around his house. Now, they was like, "Look, man, you can't live like this, man. This ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna work out for you." So slowly but surely, they begin to turn Martin Luther King over to the nonviolent theology. Now, then of course, he started to study people like Gandhi and people like that with nonviolent tendencies, and he started to use that strategy. But keep in mind, in 1963, that was the March on Washington, and that's the whole "I Have a Dream" narrative that came up. But keep in mind, the full name of the March on Washington was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. So it wasn't just about unity and holding hands and voting. It was about economic opportunity, in which, once again, he spoke a lot of. Now, a lot of people, once again, want to reduce him to, the integration and the voting and all of those things. But Martin Luther was much more than that. And even his name, right? His name was really Michael Luther King Jr. Now, his father, which what they call Daddy King, started to study and travel abroad, and he learned about the Baptist or the Protestant teacher, Martin Luther. And Protestant actually means, came from the word protest. The Protestants were protesting how the Catholics practiced Christianity, which is a whole nother story. But yet and still, Dr. King's daddy, or Daddy King as they call him, became enamored or fascinated with the work of Martin Luther. So he changed his name and his son's name to Martin Luther King thereafter. Now, I don't know what year that was, but the one we know as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was actually born as Michael Luther King. But once again, these quotes were attributed to Martin Luther King as he began. And once again, they relegate his life and his work to the 1963 "I Have a Dream" speech. Now, he spoke and did much more work for the next 5 years. Why don't they talk about those things? Because those things really shine the light on who American was and how greatly he opposed what America was doing. But they don't talk about that yesterday. You won't hear this quote from Martin Luther King on January 15th next year. So I'm going to give it to you now. He said, "The trouble is that we lived in a failed system. Capitalism does not permit an even flow of economic resources. With this system, a small privileged few are rich beyond conscience, and almost all others are doomed to be poor at some level. That's the way the system works. And since we know that the system will not change the rules, we're going to have to change the system." You won't hear that, right? That has nothing to do with voting, right? That has everything to do with dismantling the capitalistic system that still exists today, where a few people are rich and the majority and the masses of people in America are either below the poverty level, living paycheck to paycheck, or just barely scraping by, or having to work tooth and nail day in and day out to keep whatever luxuries and pleasures that they have. So that is what you won't hear on January 15th next year. Here's another quote where Martin Luther King was critical of the modern day church. And once again, if you listen to this quote from nearly 50 years ago, you would see how it still relates today. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. How does that sound about today's church? It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo, far from being disturbed by the presence of the church. The power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's often vocal sanction of things the way they are. What he's saying is the church is supposed to be opposing these things, these ills, these governmental ills, these community ills. But he said that the church is often so non-vocal, it's sort of like they are supporting what is going on in these communities. And that still rings true today, in my opinion, in some churches. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. Now you see that now with all of these church scandals coming to fruition. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. Now tell me he was not prophetic in those words right there. Does that not describe the modern day church in totality? A social club, a mere social club with no meaning. He said, "I meet young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust." And I do too. Now that's from the letter from the Birmingham jail. Now, once again, this is from one of his latter speeches called Beyond Vietnam. Now, once again, he was very opposed to the Vietnam War, which was in direct opposition to the government's goal, because everybody knows war is big business. He actually supported the poor people all across the world, even the poor Viet Cong or the Vietnamese that we were going over there and trying to slaughter, in which they withstood, the onslaught or the encroachment of the American imperialism or colonialism. They withstood that, and we all know the results of the Vietnam War. That is one that we took the L on. But he also quoted in this script, he said, "We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the three triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Three things: racism, capitalism, and militarism. All of those things are prevalent in today like never before. So once again, Dr. Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream drum major for justice, was very prophetic in his speeches. Another thing that once again got him killed was he moved on from, okay, we want to, go to the bathroom with white people. We want to, sit at the same table with white people until, no, we need economic opportunities. Basically, we needed reparations. Now, in 1967, 1 year before his death, this quote is an idea of how much he changed. He said, "We aren't merely struggling to integrate a lunch counter now. We're struggling to get some money to be able to buy a hamburger or steak when we get to the counter." You see how that flipped? We don't want to just sit there. Nah, we want to be able to afford, be on the same equal playing field as you guys. That's what got him killed. When he started talking about the economic aspect. And once again, King, he was a product of a much broader movement. In 1967, once again, he started the Poor People's Campaign. Now, that was for all poor. He shifted from integrationist viewpoint to an economic viewpoint. But one thing, once again, he said in defense of his stance against the Vietnam War, which once again, this made him very unpopular. He said, it is a shame for us to send people to Vietnam to kill and die together. Black men, and actually, the Vietnam War was a cleansing. They sent poor blacks and poor whites to fight that war. Look it up as well. He said, it is hypocritical for the United States to send poor people, black and white alike, to kill and die for it together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. You see the hypocrisy there? He called it out. Oh, you'll send us together to fight for each other, but when we come back, we can't even go to the same school. How hypocritical was that? That's why, once again, that I Have a Dream, Hold My Mule, Shirley Caesar, Mahalia Jackson inspired speech, because Mahalia Jackson convinced him to ad-lib that I Have a Dream ending. But just a year after that, he was working with the sanitation workers. He was fighting for those who were fighting poverty and racism and joblessness. So he was calling America out on all fronts. And of course, we all know in 1968, that's when he was killed by James Earl Ray. So looking at all this, he was not a prophet or a prophet of unity. No, he was a fighter for all of the oppressed. Everything that was wrong with America, he called it out. So it wasn't just, that line that is often quoted, where little black girls and little white girls will hold hands and sing that old Negro spiritual. No, man, he moved way past that. But we are stuck on it. That's what they want us to know about Martin Luther King. But there's so much to know, once again in the speech, beyond Vietnam, a time to break the silence. He says, and this clearly applies today, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Now, he said that 50 years ago. What do we see now? America is spending so much money on military defense that the schools are in erosion. Our economy is in erosion. Our social and moral uplifting program, homelessness is out of control. Drug abuse is out. Like so many programs can be funded by the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars for so-called defense, which is none other than modern day colonialism or imperialism, that none of the essential programs like education, all of these, healthcare, everything that people complain about, all of those problems can be fixed if we were not going around the world engaging in this military industrial complex. So once again, today Martin Luther King will be right out, making people uncomfortable as he did back then. And so once again, he in 1967, he got away from, one day we shall overcome to, no, the urgency is now. He said, we are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is a such thing as being too late. What he was saying, like, look, we can't wait until tomorrow. We're not going to, hold hands and pray that we're going to see the promised land. No, we need to make some changes now. So he moved toward, the economic aspect. Even in the in the speech, the I Have a Dream, when he marched to the nation's capital, this is what he said. He said, in a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. Now remember, the march was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He said, it is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. And what promissory note? He meaning the terms of the Emancipation Proclamation. He said, instead of honoring this sacred document, this obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. They don't quote that part of the speech. Why not? Because the part about the Allegheny Mountains and over the stone hills of Georgia, that sounds better. That makes people feel good, right? He said he demanded payment of the century-old promissory note called the Emancipation Proclamation. He said, until all the wealth piled up by the bondsman, which means the slave, 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk. And until every drop of blood drawn with the last shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. What he's saying is, look, we worked for 250 years and y'all stockpiled a lot of wealth. Y'all need to pay that back. And also to every drop of blood that was spilled by your lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. Now, was that nonviolent? No. But they won't tell you that. They won't speak that part about Dr. King. Dr. King was very much more than, what they give us. Even in 1968, the year of his death, once again, his change of view was probably a major catalyst for him being executed. He said the absence of brutality and unregenerate evil is not the presence of justice. What does he mean by that? Just because y'all are not hanging us from trees and y'all not whipping us with sticks and y'all not burning crosses on our yard, even though they were still doing that. He said that still doesn't mean there's justice. He talked about Chicago where it was more systematic, more adaptive, and harder to challenge with the theatrics of nonviolence, because they weren't being violent towards black people. There were certain systems set up to keep black people down. And also he said America might have to move toward democratic socialism. Now, he was called a socialist. He was called a Marxist. He was called a communist. They labeled Dr. King all of these things that are not talked about today, because we want to remember him in that docile, idealistic image that was not even prevalent then. So to think that it's prevalent now is a grave injustice to Martin Luther King and everything he stood for. He said, to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation, America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in its revolution of values. Now, that is just a few. And I could go on and on for hours and hours about who Martin Luther King really was. But we get this whitewashed, Disney-fied, as one article put it, version of Martin Luther King, when he was not that. Like I said, the majority of the people, black and white, today will be uncomfortable. You see what he said with the churches. All of your modern day preachers who go along with the status quo and don't challenge it, like he said the original churches did. They were the voice of the community. They were the social and moral and even the political arm of the, especially the black community. They were the arm of the community to challenge governmental, economic, military wrongs, right? But as he said, the church has become so silent and like a mere social club with no ineffectual voice that most people have turned from disappointment at the church to outright disgust. Once again, everybody wants to know why no one goes to church. Martin Luther King just explained it. But the pastor won't give you that one, on January the 15th. And I got so much more, but I just wanted to, just interject, because the nostalgia of yesterday has passed, right? Everybody honored the idea of Martin Luther King, but now everybody goes right back to the capitalism, the materialism, and the covert and sometimes overt racism, poverty, the oppression, all of the things that Martin Luther King was against. We go right back to participating in those things a day after we pay homage to him. And we think that the dream has been realized. Most people say, yeah, Martin Luther King had a dream and then he woke up. And that's when they killed him, when he woke up. He stopped dreaming and realized who America was and what it really was going to take to accomplish, what is needed to be accomplished. And so, Martin Luther King was more, than just, what they present to you in the history books. And I just wanted to impart a little bit of who he was. And once again, that's not even a drop in the bucket. The man who, started, in 1956 with his house being bombed, ready to strap up from those and even before then, even a teenager, they talked about how vocal he was in calling out racism as a teenager. And then, for the next 12 years from 1956 and all of his work before him, it is disingenuous to reduce his work to just an "I have a dream" speech. And that's just my opinion. But I think that we do a great disservice to the man, the legacy, and also the work that he's done just to reduce him to a few little lines and a few little boycotts and things that I know he was much more. He was a soldier, he was a rebel, he was a radical, he was a troublemaker, he was a rabble rouser, as they called him, and he was much maligned and hated when he was living. So he was not given his flowers when he was living. And, if he was living today, we wouldn't be giving him flowers. Well, I would, because I'll be right behind him. And a lot of people, I meet people in public and say, yeah, you're trying to start, one Caucasian lady, we had a great conversation. She said, you're trying to start a race riot. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even touch on racism like I used to. 10 years ago, if you know me from then and you know me to now, I'm very tame, in my regards to, how I speak and, the way I speak about things. Now, some things, you just got to call it how it is. But, my delivery was just outright offensive and whatever, truthful or whatever, like, it was no filter. So if you go back to look at my Facebook page from, 2011, 12, 13, it was all out, everything is racist. You know what I'm saying? Why when I go to the coffee shop, I get a white saucer and a white cup? Nah, I want a black cup. It was that type of deal. But, I've come to learn that, a lot of these things are systematic. It's not personal. Racism is not personal. Racism is more than, someone not liking me. Racism is more than, someone calling me a nigger. That's not racism. That's prejudice. Racism is when every bank I go to, nobody owns the bank that looks like me. Every school or institution I go to, nobody owns the school or runs the school. Racism is every hospital I go to, every healthcare, all insurance company are owned by somebody who not looks like me. Racism is the ability of one group to control, contain, and prevent another group's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is racism. When I get stopped by a police and, go to a court and then I have to go in front of the judge who doesn't look like me and I go in front of, the DA who doesn't look like me, it's an entire system that is engulfed in racism. And I won't even get into explaining that. Because if you don't know by now, it's like Ice Cube said in Boys the Hood. Either they don't know, don't show, or don't care what's going on in terms of racism. But, nevertheless, 919-587-7782. You can give me a call back for any information, anything that I've said wrong in this video. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Peace and love, everybody. Peace, love, happiness, justice for everybody. Everybody. White, black, rich, poor, boy, girl, blah, blah, blah. Everybody deserves it. That's what Martin Luther King was about. So once again, happy Martin Luther King Day to all.